Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the free video tutorial today, we are going to hammer some copper washers, one of my favourite pastimes. We're going to take a standard stretch bracelet. These are 8mm round moonstone beads, so you could start with a strand of beads if you prefer, but you can get stretch bracelets almost everywhere. So let's head down to the board and we'll talk a little bit more about what we're going to make together. For today's video, I've got some 8mm beads. These are on a stretch bracelet and there are 23 beads. I'll cut those in a moment. I've also got a selection of copper washers. Now I've got 22 of the smaller. These have a 9mm outer diameter and they're 1mm thick. And then I have 5 of the larger. These are 12mm outer diameter. And they are also 1mm thick. They will take a texturing really nicely. I've got a 12-inch length of beading elastic. I have my chasing hammer and a block. And I've also got some very, very old, rather discoloured nail varnish. Now this is absolutely perfect for the job. You can of course use a gel glue for jewellery. That will work really, really well. The main part of today's tutorial is going to be the texturing of these lovely washers. So I have got 1 fewer of the smaller washers and 5 of the larger washers. And all we're going to do is texture each of those in turn until we have a really lovely hammered texture over the top. I really enjoy working with copper. It's a beautiful material and I was able to find a box of copper washers for a very inexpensive price. So I'm going to take one of the slightly larger copper washers simply because it is going to be easier to show you on screen. With the smaller ones, you can absolutely go for the same technique, but you'll obviously need to be a little bit mindful of your fingertips. Now I tend to always hold my washers. You can go freehand and try hitting them without holding them down, or you can tape them with electrician's tape. That will peel away quite nicely, but I don't like to use it because it leaves a little bit of sticky residue on my block. So I'm going to grab one of those larger, and again this is a 12mm outer diameter. I think it's about 9mm on the inner diameter on this one. And that is again a 1mm thick piece of copper. I'm going to use my gorgeous Beadalon chasing hammer. I'm going to hold one side whilst I pop some dimples down on the surface. With this technique, you're not striking terribly hard because when you come to texture the second side, if you strike incredibly hard, what will happen is you'll smooth the first side out. So it's just a case of doing it little by little. With the slightly larger ones, I can do it half and half. With the smaller ones, what I tended to do was to move third and a third and a third, just to make sure my finger stayed relatively safe. Now with this technique, it is desirable actually to strike down near the edges. Sometimes when you're texturing, you don't really want to strike down at the edges because it deforms the shape of the metal. But in this case, we actually want that to happen because it adds some detail to the surface that you'll be seeing most of. So let's have a look at the second side. That is something that happens if you don't hold on to it strongly enough. They tiddlywink off into infinity. As you can see, it doesn't really take very long at all to get that little bit of texture, and you do, if you strike down very firmly on the second side, start to smooth out that first side just a little bit. It's quite a nice texture. What you'll be seeing from the worn side of the jewellery is mostly the outside. It's very rare that you'll see very much of the textured side. It just adds a little bit of strength and a little bit of light flash to them. So if you want to, you can add a little bit of texture to the outside as well. Which will give you a little bit more glitz and light. when you're wearing the design. So over the next couple of moments, I'm just going to texture all 5 of the larger copper washers and then all 22 of the smaller copper washers, and I'll join you back in a moment. I've hammered each of the faces of those copper washers, 22 of the small and 5 of the slightly larger ones, and now I'm going to show you how you can add a little bit more texture around the outside edges. I've threaded all 22 of the smaller washers onto a piece of 2mm gauge wire, and what we're going to do is try to turn quite a strong angle on the end. To do this, I'm going to use the box joint of my flat pliers to get as strong an angle change in that wire as possible, and then the same again. And what we're going to do is then slide those washers up into position. Now they may move around that end bit. If they do, don't worry, you can simply reorder the washers so that you will be able to get texture over all of them. So let's just put that down onto the block. And then I'm going to apply some texture around the outside of those washers. So I'm just going to hold those washers in position whilst I strike down with just the edge of my chasing hammer. So I'm moving down at around about a 35-degree angle, and then as I move the washers around, you'll be able to see the light glinting on them. So it's quite a different textural effect than that which we have on the surface of the washers, but it's really attractive and it catches the light when you're wearing the finished piece of jewellery. So I'm just going to finish off moving these round as I go, and if I find that there's not enough texture on the end couple, then I will simply reorder them and go round again. I'm now going to alternate between threading on one of my 8mm moonstone beads, and don't worry, I'm not going to make you watch me do this all the way through, and then one of the smaller copper washers. I'm going to do this until I have loaded them all on, and we will move on to the next stage then. So I've started with a bead and I finished with a bead, and then there is one of our textured copper washers, the smaller ones in between each of those beads. What we're going to do is just pre-stretch that beading elastic first. Just give that a little bit of a stretch out, and it means that when you do tie the knot in your stretch bracelet, you're much more likely to have it stay that same kind of size rather than going a bit baggy. So what we're going to do now is to thread on those 5 slightly larger textured copper washers onto one end, it doesn't really matter which one, and then we're going to tie a series of knots and secure it all together. So quite often with stretch bracelets, you're going to find that the beads have got quite a nice drill hole, rather than buying beads on a strand which may have quite a small drill aperture. So this is just a nice way to update a stretch bracelet you may already own. So let's just rotate those around so that they sit in their final position. And what we're going to do is just tie a standard knot. I believe it's called an overhand knot, but I don't know anything about knotting. So I'm going to cross the right hand beading elastic over the top of the left hand one, push it down and around, and then draw those two ends together. I'm putting just a little bit of tension on this, but not so much that I'm putting too much stretch and reducing the lifespan of that elastic. What I'm going to do now is exactly the same thing again. The new left hand thread beading elastic is going to go over the top of the right hand, push down and around, but I'm going to do that a second time with that tail. So we've got quite a long twist of elastic there, and I'm going to draw that all the way down against that first knot. Now just give that a bit of a tweak, but not so much that you're overstretching that elastic. The next thing we're going to do is to grab in your jewellery glue of choice. Now I would say a jewellery glue that is more of a gel. Super glue isn't terribly helpful because it is a hard setting glue. a jewellery gel is made for this kind of thing, so perhaps I think it's E9000, something like that, but I've got this gold flaked nail varnish which I've used on all of my stretchy bracelets over the last 15 years, and none of them have come away at that point. So this is what works for me. You may find that a jewellery glue, a gel glue, is better for you. So let's just give that a little bit of a wiggle, make sure it's still liquid, it's an old pot, and then we're going to find that knot, just going to pull that away. You may like to just ensure that you've not outstretched it, you've pulled it out of position. No, that's still a good shape, it's still a good structure. So the way that I do this, you could use a third hand if you wanted to, but the way I do this is to just open out that knot, gain access to the lovely little bundle of material just there, and I'm going to put a dab of my nail varnish directly onto that knot, over the top. If you get a little bit on your end bead, it really doesn't matter. So I'm just going to give that a second to go slightly tacky. Make sure that you close up your glue or your nail varnish as you prefer. And then what I'm going to do is wiggle those ends just a little bit. And what that will do is it will allow the glue or the nail varnish to just seep into that knot slightly. And then we're going to tie 2 more knots. So again, it's exactly the same knot. My left hand thread is going over the top of the right hand thread, and it's just coming all the way around twice. And then I'm going to pull that tight into that ooky, sticky mess of glue. Now I'm going to give that a bit of a wiggle. What I normally do at this stage is allow that to cure for at least an hour before I trim those ends away. Once your glue or nail varnish has cured properly for around about an hour, I'll trim that really quite close but not dead against that knot. And then we'll just give that a little bit of a jiggle so that the knot sits inside that stack of 5 textured washers. Now, if you wanted to stop there, you absolutely can. I would allow that to cure fully for 24 hours before rolling it onto the wrist, because when you roll it onto the wrist, you put stress on the join in the middle there. So I'm going to allow that to set completely before wearing it. But I hope that you like that project. So there is your hammered copper washer bracelet, stretch bracelet at that. Really, really easy, very affordable to achieve with just some copper washers from a hardware store or similar. What I'm going to do now is to show you how you can add just a little bit extra to this design. I found another washer in that collection that is just slightly larger than a matching bead I found in my bead stash. So there's at least 1 millimetre either side. If it's an 8 millimetre bead, then the inner diameter would need to be at least 10 millimetres. We need a little bit of space between the bead and that washer. I've textured it in exactly the same way as I textured all the others. And what we're going to do now is use just a tiny scrap of wire. I have a 4-inch length of 0.8 or 20 gauge wire, and what we're going to do is just lay that midpoint across the washer in question, give that a bit of a pinch, and then make a very firm bend over one side of the central line of that washer. So really, really warm that through and just poke that up inside the washer. And what we're going to do is to pull that very firmly up and through. Make sure that we get the line very, very flat over the surface of that washer's edge and just pull that away. Let's give that a bit of a squish to give it some stability. We're going to turn that into a spiral to cover up this join in a moment. But right now we need to get our bead into position. So let's make sure that that sits centrally over the washer. Add on the bead. Again, this is a 0.8 or 20 gauge wire, and it fits perfectly through my matching rainbow moonstone bead. So where I've got the tail of wire coming away to the right of that central line, what I want to do now is create another sharp angle over the other side of the washer, warm through the tail, and bring that up to the right. So down at the bottom, the extra wire is bending around the washer and coming away to the left of that central line. So this side needs to come up to the right of that central line. And it will wiggle around a little bit, so you may need to employ your pliers just to pull that through and give it a really good squish. So we're looking to sit your bead centrally inside this little halo of a washer. I'm going to add this to the central washer on our stretch bracelet that we've enhanced with those hammered washers. So let's give that a smooth and a warm through to make sure it's fluid and ready to do what we need it to do. Let's leave a little bit of a space and then make a right angle bend up at the top. Rotate those pliers all the way around, back over in the opposite direction. And then what we're going to do is choose one of the faces. It doesn't really matter because it will move around in wear anyway. What we're going to do is find that central of those 5 washers that we use to cover up the glue or the knot. And we're just going to slide our extra little charm onto that central washer. So once that sits in position on the central washer, we're going to grip across that round form. If you've made quite a small loop like I have, you may need to just grip half of it to get going. And then you'll be able to hold on to it whilst you bring that tail around. So we're just looking to fill that space. Like so. And then just make sure that everything is nice and straight. So I've brought the tail of wire down. I've rotated around that core wire a couple of times. And now I've got a very small tail just sticking out to one side. So I'm going to trim the tail of wire at the bottom to about the same length. It doesn't need to be exactly precise, but it does help if they are vaguely similar. So let's trim that away, get rid of the scrap. And then we're going to use round nose pliers to create small spirals to just sit over the surface of that washer. So we'll start with a rounded form and then move on to those flat-faced pliers. And I'm going to draw that all the way up and press it down over that joining section. And then I'll do the same at the top. So again, when you're making spirals, it does pay to take your time. Start with the very end of your pliers at the very end of that wire with the round nose pliers, and then switch over to your chain nose pliers. I'm using my bent chain nose pliers, and then I'm going to push that spiral. I'll show you that sideways. Push that spiral down over the face, give it a bit of a squish. So we have enhanced our very plain but beautiful stretch bracelet. Let's sit that all into position. And now we've got a little bit of a halo charm to go with it. I hope that you've enjoyed today's tutorial. Well, if you like smashing metal as much as I do, then I hope that you will also enjoy smashing metal today with those teeny tiny little washers. It's a great way to take a plain stretch bracelet and make it into something a little bit more flashy. Take care, enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now.